Verse 1. A tour of the Greek underworld. Picture yourself standing at the edge of the known world, where the light of Helios can no longer reach, and the air grows thick with the weight of eternity. Here, at the boundary between life and death, flows the river Styx, black as midnight, silent as secrets, and older than memory itself. The water moves without sound, carrying upon its surface the faintest shimmer, like oil in moonlight. Along its banks, pale asphodels grow in endless meadows, their ghostly flowers nodding in a breeze that never quite touches the living. The air smells of damp earth and something else, something that speaks of endings and new beginnings, of journeys completed and rest finally found. A figure emerges from the mist that clings to the water's edge. Charon, the ferryman, poles his ancient craft toward the shore. His boat is simple weathered wood that has carried countless souls across this boundary. There's something almost comforting about his presence, not the terrifying specter you might expect, but rather a quiet professional, someone who has performed the same gentle service for millennia without complaint or hurry. His face is neither kind nor cruel, but patient in the way that only comes from eternal routine. His robes are the color of twilight, and when he speaks, his voice carries the weight of all the farewells ever whispered. He extends one weathered hand, not demanding, but simply waiting. For the coin, yes, the hobble placed beneath the tongue or over the eyes, but more than that, he waits for acceptance. The understanding that this journey, like all journeys, must eventually be taken. As the boat slips away from the shore, you feel the gentle rocking motion, the soft sound of water lapping against the hull. There's no fear here, only a deep, profound quiet. The mist parts slowly, revealing glimpses of the shore you're approaching, the true beginning of the underworld, where Hades rules with his stolen bride, Persephone, and where every soul finds its appointed place. The first thing you notice as you step onto the opposite shore is the presence watching from the shadows ahead. Cerberus, the three-headed hound who guards the gate, is not the slavering monster of nightmares, but something far more complex. Each of his three heads represents a different aspect of time past, present, and future, and his eyes hold the wisdom of one who has seen every soul that ever lived pass through these gates. His fur is black as the space between stars, and when he breathes, the sound is like distant thunder rolling across an endless plain. But there's something almost domestic about him too. The way he settles back on his haunches when he recognizes that you belong here now, that you're part of the natural order of things. One head might regard you with ancient sadness, another with acceptance, and the third with something that might almost be kindness. Beyond Cerberus, the path splits into three directions, each leading to a different realm within this vast kingdom of the dead. The signposts are not written in any earthly language, but somehow their meaning is clear, as if understanding them is simply part of what happens when you cross from one world to the next. To the left lies the path to the Asphodel Meadows, where the vast majority of souls spend their eternity. It's not a place of punishment or reward, but simply ... continuation. The meadows stretch beyond the horizon, filled with those pale silver flowers that never quite bloom and never quite fade. Here, the souls of ordinary people, farmers and merchants, mothers and children, all those who lived neither exceptionally virtuous nor exceptionally wicked lives, wander in a state of gentle melancholy. They appear as they were in life, but softened somehow, like watercolor paintings left too long in the sun. A farmer still tends to phantom crops, but without the urgency of harvest time. A mother still sings lullabies, but to children who need no sleep. There's a peculiar peace to it, this endless afternoon of existence, where memory is both sharp and dreamlike, where time passes but brings no change. Some souls gather in small groups, sharing stories that grow more mythical with each telling. Others walk alone along paths that wind through the asphodels, always moving, but never quite arriving anywhere in particular. The light here is neither day nor night, but something in between the color of old silver, casting no shadows, but revealing everything with a soft, even clarity. Occasionally, you might glimpse a soul pausing by a stream that reflects no image, or sitting beneath a tree that bears fruit no one ever picks. There's no suffering here, but there's no great joy, either, only the quiet continuation of being, stripped of urgency and need. It's neither heaven nor hell, but something uniquely Greek, a place where existence itself is enough, where the simple fact of having lived grants you the right to continue existing, even if in this subdued, eternal form. The second path leads upward, toward distant golden light that seems to pulse like a gentle heartbeat. This is the way to the Elysian fields, the paradise reserved for heroes and those who lived with extraordinary virtue. But heroism, in the Greek understanding, was a complex thing, not simply about courage in battle, but about excellence in whatever role fate had assigned you. As you climb the gentle slope toward that warm light, the air itself seems to change, becoming lighter, sweeter, touched with the scent of honey and fresh-baked bread, of olive groves in bloom, and wine aging in cool cellars. The path is lined with cypress trees that whisper secrets in languages older than words, and beneath their branches, springs of crystal clear water bubble up from the earth. The heroes who dwell here are not the bronze-muscled demigods of popular imagination, but something more nuanced, more human. Achilles might be found not practicing with sword and spear, but sitting by a stream, finally at peace with the choice between a long, quiet life and a short, glorious one. His armor lies beside him, still gleaming, but forgotten for the moment as he watches minnows dart through the clear water. Here, Penelope might be found weaving at her loom, but now the work is for pleasure rather than necessity. Her tapestries tell the stories of those she left behind, of those who joined her, of loves and losses and small, daily triumphs. The threads shimmer with colors that have no names in the living world, and the patterns change subtly as you watch, like thoughts made visible. The heroes feast together in halls that seem to be made of condensed sunlight, sharing not just food and wine that never runs out, but stories that grow richer with each telling. Time moves differently here. Sometimes a conversation might last what feels like years. Sometimes a feast passes in what seems like moments. But there's no impatience, no sense of time wasted or lost, only the deep satisfaction of stories worth telling and company worth keeping. Some heroes spend their eternity perfecting the skills that brought them here, but now for joy rather than necessity. A great healer might tend gardens of miraculous herbs, not because anyone is sick, but because the work brings the same satisfaction it always did. A wise judge might mediate disputes between nymphs and satyrs, not because the conflicts are serious, but because wisdom, once cultivated, seeks its own expression. But it's the third path that draws the eye with a kind of horrified fascination, the narrow, descending track that leads to Tartarus, the prison of the gods themselves. This is where those who committed the most heinous crimes against the natural order serve their eternal punishments. The path itself seems reluctant to exist, winding downward through stone that weeps and air that tastes of regret. The entrance to Tartarus is guarded by the Furies Alecto, Megira, and Tisiphon, whose very names were whispered only when necessary. They are not creatures of random violence, but of precise, implacable justice. Their hair writhes with living serpents. Their eyes weep tears of blood, and their voices carry the weight of every unavenged wrong ever committed. Yet there's something almost clerical about them, the way they check their scrolls and confirm identities before allowing passage. Even divine vengeance, it seems, requires proper documentation. Within Tartarus itself, the punishments are famous and terrible, but also strangely specific to each crime. Tantalus, who served his own son as dinner to the gods, stands forever in a pool of water that recedes when he tries to drink, beneath fruit trees whose branches pull away when he reaches for them. The punishment fits not just the crime, but the mindset that made the crime possible, the inability to be satisfied, to find enough in what is offered. Sisyphus pushes his boulder up the mountainside with the steady rhythm of someone who has long since stopped hoping for the task to end. But perhaps, in some strange way, he has found a kind of peace in the repetition, in the simplicity of having only one responsibility, one task to perform. His crime was hubris trying to outsmart death itself, and his punishment is the ultimate lesson in acceptance. Ixion spins forever on his wheel of fire, and from a distance, emotion becomes almost hypnotic, like watching flames dance in a hearth. His crime was attempting to seduce Hera, Zeus's wife, but his punishment speaks to something deeper, the way that obsession, unchecked, becomes its own prison, spinning the same thoughts and desires endlessly, without resolution or rest. Yet even in Tartarus, there's a strange order, a sense that justice, however harsh, follows its own ancient logic. The Titans who once ruled the cosmos before Zeus and his siblings overthrew them are imprisoned here, but they maintain their dignity, their ancient wisdom. Kronos, who once devoured his own children to prevent them from usurping his power, has had eternity to contemplate the futility of trying to stop time itself. Between these three realms flows the geography of the underworld, proper the palace of Hades and Persephone, where the business of death is conducted with the same careful attention to detail that any royal court might give to matters of state. The palace itself is carved from black marble that seems to absorb light rather than reflect it. But somehow this creates a sense of intimacy rather than oppression, like being safely enclosed in the heart of a mountain. Hades himself is not the devil of later mythologies, but something more complex, a god who never chose his realm, but who accepted it with the grim responsibility that characterizes all the best rulers. He sits on his throne of polished obsidian, reviewing the cases brought before him with the patience of someone who knows that eternity allows for proper consideration of every detail. Persephone, beside him, embodies the strange duality of the underworld itself. For 6 months of the year, she is the queen of the dead, pale and terrible in her dark crown, speaking for those who can no longer speak for themselves. But within her, always is the promise of spring's return, the reminder that even in the deepest darkness, life waits to be reborn. Their court is attended by various minor deities and spirits, each with their own role in the vast bureaucracy of death. Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Aeacus serve as judges, weighing the deeds of the newly arrived with scales that cannot be fooled by earthly pretenses. Their deliberations are conducted in voices like distant wind, and their decisions, once made, carry the weight of cosmic law. Hypnos and Thanatos, the twin gods of sleep and death, move through the palace like gentle servants, attending to their eternal duties with the quiet efficiency of those who know their work is essential but never urgent. Hypnos carries a horn filled with opium-scented dreams, while Thanatos bears a torch that, when extinguished, marks the moment when a soul finally lets go its last connection to the living world. Throughout the underworld, rivers run like veins of memory and forgetfulness. The Styx, which you cross to enter, is only the most famous. The Acheron, river of woe, carries away the tears of the newly dead. The Cocytus, river of lamentation, echoes with the cries of those who still mourn their mortal losses. The Phlegethon burns with fire that purifies rather than destroys, while the Lethe offers the sweet blessing of forgetfulness to those souls ready to be reborn. But perhaps the most important feature of the underworld is what it's not. It's not a place of eternal torment for the masses, not a reflection of moral judgment as later religions would conceive it. Instead, it's a place of completion, where every story finds its ending, where every journey reaches its destination. It's vast enough to hold every soul that ever lived, patient enough to give each one exactly the eternity they have earned, and wise enough to recognize that death, properly understood, is not an ending but a transformation. As this first part of our journey draws to a close, we leave the underworld not with relief at escaping, but with a strange sense of comfort. The Greeks understood something profound about death, that it's not the opposite of life, but its completion, the place where all the scattered pieces of a human existence finally form a complete picture. In the realm of Hades and Persephone, every soul finds exactly what it needs: rest for the weary, glory for the heroic, justice for the wicked, and for most, simply the quiet continuation of being. It's neither terrifying nor blissful, but something uniquely suited to the Greek understanding of existence balanced, proportional, and ultimately, peacefully inevitable. Segment 2. The Tragedy of Oedipus Rex. As we rise from the depths of the underworld, we find ourselves in the bright, dust-filled world of the living, where mortals struggle against forces they cannot see or understand. Here, in the ancient city of Thebes, with its 7 gates and its proud walls, a story unfolds that the Greeks told and retold for centuries, not because it was happy, but because it revealed something essential about the nature of fate, knowledge, and the terrible weight of truth. This is the story of Oedipus, whose very name has become synonymous with the tragic irony of human existence. But tonight, we'll tell it slowly, gently, focusing not on the shock of revelation, but on the quiet human moments that make this ancient tale feel as immediate as yesterday's sorrow. The story begins, as many Greek tragedies do, with a prophecy, those words from the gods that mortals always think they can outsmart, but which inevitably prove to be as inescapable as the turning of the seasons. In the oracle at Delphi, where the Pythia sat on her 3-legged stool above the sacred fissure in the earth, breathing vapors that carried divine wisdom, King Eleusis of Thebes received news that would shape 3 generations of his family. The prophecy was simple and terrible. Any son born to him would grow up to kill his father and marry his mother. The words hung in the sacred air like incense, sweet and choking, impossible to ignore and impossible to accept. Eleusis returned to Thebes, carrying this knowledge like a stone in his chest, his future that felt more real in the present moment. When Queen Jocasta bore him a son, the baby's arrival was not greeted with the usual celebration. Instead, there was a terrible practicality to the king's response. The infant was taken to the mountainside, his ankles pierced and bound, a small cruelty meant to prevent a larger one. The shepherd who carried out this grim task was told that mercy and duty sometimes require the same terrible action. But mercy, in the Greek understanding, often wears unexpected faces. The shepherd, looking down at the crying infant, could not bring himself to leave the child to die. Instead, he passed the baby to another shepherd from the neighboring kingdom of Corinth, with instructions to take the child far away, to a place where prophecies could not reach. In Corinth, King Polybus and Queen Merope, who had long mourned their childlessness, received this unexpected gift with joy. They named the boy Oedipus, swollen foot, a reference to his injured ankles, but also, unknowingly, a name that would always carry the mark of his first encounter with fate. To them, he was not a child marked by prophecy, but simply their son, raised with all the love and privilege due to a prince. Oedipus grew into a young man of remarkable intelligence and fierce pride. He was educated by the best tutors, trained in rhetoric and philosophy, athletics and warfare. His adoptive parents doted on him, and he had every reason to believe that his future stretched before him, bright and uncomplicated. The court of Corinth was his world, and he moved through it with the confidence of someone who had never had reason to doubt his place in the universe. But even in the most carefully constructed life, truth has a way of seeping through the cracks. At a feast one night, a guest who had drunk too much wine made a careless comment about Oedipus's parentage. The words were probably meant as a joke, the kind of cruel jest that wine sometimes loosens from tongues that should know better. But they lodged in Oedipus's mind like a splinter, growing more painful with time. When he confronted his parents, Polybus and Merope responded with the kind of loving reassurance that parents give to children who ask difficult questions. They soothed his doubts, perhaps too eagerly, and their very eagerness planted deeper seeds of uncertainty. Love, Oedipus learned, could be its own form of concealment. Unable to rest with this doubt gnawing at him, Oedipus made the journey to Delphi, seeking the truth about his parentage from the same oracle that had spoken to Laius decades before. But the Pythia, speaking in the voice of Apollo, did not answer the question he asked. Instead, she delivered the same prophecy that had haunted his birth. He would kill his father and marry his mother. The words hit Oedipus like a physical blow. Standing in that sacred space, with the smell of burning laurel and the sound of sacred water trickling over stone, he felt his entire future collapse into a single, horrible possibility. If Polybus and Merope were his parents, then he could never return to Corinth. Love itself became a danger, family a trap to be avoided at all costs. So he made what seemed like the only rational choice. He would never go home again. He would wander the world, keeping far from Corinth and the people he loved, sacrificing his own happiness to prevent the fulfillment of the prophecy. It was a decision made from the highest motives, a young man's noble attempt to protect his family from his own terrible destiny. But prophecies, as the Greeks understood them, are not instructions to be followed or avoided. They are simply statements of what will be. And fate has a way of using our very attempts to escape it as the mechanism of its fulfillment. On the road away from Delphi, where three paths meet at a place marked by ancient stones, Oedipus encountered a small traveling party, an old man in a chariot, accompanied by several servants. The meeting began with the sort of minor discourtesy that happens when two groups of travelers meet on a narrow road. Someone had to yield the right of way, and neither party was immediately inclined to do so. The old man was imperious, accustomed to deference. Oedipus was young, proud, and carrying the weight of a terrible prophecy. Words were exchanged first about the road, then about respect and station. The argument escalated with the swift inevitability of a summer storm, and in the end, violence flared like lightning. It was over quickly. The old man struck first, perhaps Oedipus's temper finally snapped under the weight of his recent revelation. In any case, when the dust settled, the old man lay dead, along with most of his servants. Only one escaped, fleeing back toward Thebes with news of the attack. Oedipus continued on his way, shaken by the violence, but telling himself it was self-defense, that he had been provoked, that the old man's arrogance had brought about his own downfall. He did not know that he had just fulfilled the first part of the prophecy, that the imperious stranger was Laius, the king of Thebes, his own father, traveling to Delphi to consult the oracle about the terrible plague that was beginning to ravage his city. The road led Oedipus to Thebes, where he found a city in the grip of twin disasters. The plague was spreading, crops were failing, and to make matters worse, the Sphinx had taken up residence on the road outside the city. This creature, part woman, part lion, part eagle, posed a riddle to every traveler who passed. Those who answered incorrectly were devoured. Those who answered correctly would be allowed to proceed. But no one had yet given the correct answer. The riddle was famous. What walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs at noon, and 3 legs in the evening? It was the kind of puzzle that had stumped scholars and philosophers, merchants and soldiers. The Sphinx's voice was said to be beautiful and terrible, like music played on an instrument made of bones. But Oedipus, with his trained mind and his familiarity with philosophical paradoxes, saw through to the answer almost immediately. Man, he replied, he crawls as an infant, walks upright as an adult, and uses a cane in old age. The Sphinx, defeated by this simple truth about the stages of human life, threw herself from the cliff, her riddle solved and her purpose ended. The Thebans greeted Oedipus as a hero and savior. Here was a young man who had freed them from the terror of the Sphinx, who had solved the riddle that had stumped so many others. In their gratitude, they offered him the greatest honor they could bestow, the crown of their recently deceased king and the hand of the widowed queen, Jocasta, in marriage. To Oedipus, still believing that his parents lived safely in distant Corinth, This seemed like a gift from the gods, a chance to build a new life, to find love and purpose in a place where prophecies could not reach him. He accepted the crown and the marriage with a full heart, believing that he had finally escaped the fate that had been spoken over him. The wedding of Oedipus and Jocasta was celebrated throughout Thebes. The new king was young, intelligent, and had already proven his worth by saving the city. The queen, still beautiful and wise, seemed to have found happiness again after the grief of widowhood. They made an impressive pair, ruling with justice and compassion, and their subjects had every reason to believe that prosperity would return to their city. For nearly 20 years, it seemed that they were right. Oedipus proved to be an excellent king, fair in his judgments, and quick to act on behalf of his people. Jocasta bore him 4 children, 2 sons, Eteocles and Polynices, and 2 daughters, Antigone and Ismene. The royal family was beloved, and Thebes flourished under their rule. But the gods, it seemed, were not finished with the house of Laius. A new plague came to Thebes, more terrible than the first. Crops withered in the fields, livestock died, and women could not carry their children to term. The city that had once celebrated its salvation now found itself facing destruction once again. Oedipus, as he had always done, took immediate action. He sent his brother-in-law Creon to Delphi to consult the oracle, to discover what the gods required for the lifting of this plague. The answer that came back was both clear and ominous. The murderer of Laius must be found and punished before the city could be cleansed. This seemed reasonable to Oedipus. He had taken the throne after Laius' death, but the circumstances of that death had never been fully investigated. If finding the killer would save his city and his people, then he would dedicate all his energy and intelligence to the task. He proclaimed a public investigation, offering rewards for information and threatening punishment for anyone who concealed the truth. The investigation began with the same methodical approach that Oedipus brought to all problems. He questioned the surviving witness from the attack on the road, though the man's story seemed confused and contradictory. He consulted the blind prophet Tiresias, though the old seer seemed strangely reluctant to share his visions. He examined every piece of evidence with the thoroughness of someone who believed that truth, however painful, was always preferable to ignorance. But with each new piece of information, each careful question and reasoned deduction, Oedipus was unknowingly constructing the framework of his own destruction. The investigation that was meant to save Thebes was slowly revealing the terrible truth about his own past, his own identity, his own unwitting crimes. The old shepherd who had been ordered to expose the infant Oedipus was still alive, still carrying the weight of his long-ago mercy. When brought before the king, he tried to avoid answering the questions that would destroy the life of the man he had once saved. But Oedipus, in his determination to uncover the truth, pressed harder, threatened punishment, demanded answers. And slowly, piece by piece, the truth emerged. The baby who had been left to die on the mountainside, the shepherd who had passed him to another kingdom, the couple in Corinth who had raised him as their own, the meeting at the crossroads, the old man who had died there, whose description matched that of the murdered king. As the terrible picture became clear, Jocasta began to understand before her husband did. The woman who had lost her first child to prophecy, who had found love again with a younger man, who had borne children and ruled a kingdom, suddenly saw the pattern that connected all these events. Her joy curdled into horror. Her love transformed into something that had no name in any language. She begged Oedipus to abandon his investigation, to let the past remain buried. But he, thinking that she was merely worried about his discovering some shameful secret about his birth, persisted in his relentless pursuit of truth. The very qualities that made him a good king, his intelligence, his persistence, his refusal to accept comfortable lies, now drove him toward his own destruction. When the final pieces fell into place, when the truth could no longer be denied or rationalized away, the revelation struck with the force of divine judgment. Oedipus, the solver of riddles, had finally encountered the one puzzle he should never have solved, the mystery of his own identity. The man who had killed Laius on the road was himself. The woman he had married was his mother. The children they had raised together were both his children and his siblings. Every attempt to escape the prophecy had led him deeper into its fulfillment. Every act of love had been an act of unwitting sacrilege. Jocasta, unable to bear the weight of this knowledge, took her own life with the quiet dignity of someone who had finally understood the true scope of her tragedy. She had been the victim of fate as much as anyone. A woman who had lost her child, her husband, and her happiness to forces beyond her control, and who had found love again only to discover it was the most terrible kind of violation. Oedipus, faced with the full horror of what he had done, what he had been, what he could never undo, took the golden pins from Jocasta's dress and drove them into his own eyes. If knowledge had been his gift, then blindness would be his punishment. If sight had led him to these revelations, then he would see no more. The physical pain was nothing compared to the agony of understanding. Every memory was now transformed, every moment of happiness revealed as built on unknowing horror. The love he had felt for Jocasta, the pride he had taken in his children, the satisfaction of ruling wisely, all of it was poisoned by the truth of what he had been all along. And yet, in the midst of this absolute catastrophe, there was something almost noble about Oedipus's response to his fate. He did not blame the gods, or curse the prophecy, or rage against the injustice of his situation. Instead, he accepted responsibility for his actions, even though those actions had been committed in ignorance. He had killed his father and married his mother, and the fact that he had not known what he was doing did not, in his mind, absolve him of the consequences. This is perhaps what makes the story of Oedipus so enduringly powerful, not the shock of the revelations, but the way those revelations illuminate the tragic dignity of human existence. We are all, in some sense, stumbling through our lives without complete knowledge of what we are doing or whom we are affecting. We make decisions based on incomplete information, and we must live with the consequences of those decisions, even when we discover that our best intentions have led to terrible outcomes. Oedipus, blind and broken, exiled himself from Thebes, accompanied only by his daughter Antigone, who chose to share his wandering rather than abandon him to his fate. They walked the roads of Greece together, a former king and his devoted child, living on charity and carrying between them the weight of their story. In his exile, Oedipus became something like a holy man, his suffering having transformed him from a proud king into a figure of tragic wisdom. People came to him for advice, drawn by the paradox of his situation. A man who had been destroyed by knowledge, but who had thereby gained a deeper understanding of the human condition. The story ends not with redemption, exactly, but with a kind of peace. At Colonus, near Athens, Oedipus finally found rest. The grove of the Eumenides, those ancient goddesses of vengeance who had been transformed into protectors, accepted him at last. His death was mysterious and gentle, a disappearance rather than an ending, as if the earth itself had finally granted him the rest that his life had denied him. And so the tale of Oedipus comes to its close, not with the satisfaction of justice served, but with the deeper comfort of suffering, acknowledged and endured. It reminds us that tragedy is not always about moral failure, but sometimes about the simple, terrible fact of being human in a universe that operates according to laws we cannot fully understand or control. Verse 3. The Eleusinian mysteries from the harsh light of tragedy. We now turn to something softer, more mysterious, a secret that was kept for nearly 2,000 years, passed from initiate to initiate in whispered ceremonies, that promised nothing less than the transformation of death itself. These were the Eleusinian mysteries, the most sacred and closely guarded religious rites of the ancient world, centered around the goddess Demeter and her daughter Persephone. To understand these mysteries, we must first understand the story that gave them meaning a tale of loss and return, of a mother's grief so profound that it changed the very nature of the seasons. It begins in the meadows of Nysa, where the young Persephone wandered among flowers that bloomed eternal spring, gathering narcissus and hyacinth, roses and violets, in a world that knew neither winter nor sorrow. Persephone was the embodiment of youth and innocence, beloved daughter of Demeter, goddess of the harvest. Her laughter was said to sound like water running over stones, and her presence made flowers bloom more brightly. She moved through the world with the unconscious grace of someone who had never known loss, never imagined that happiness could be anything but permanent. But Hades, lord of the underworld, had been watching her from his realm beneath the earth. He had seen her beauty and grace, and something in his ancient heart, which had known only the company of the dead, for eons stirred with longing. He petitioned Zeus for permission to make her his bride, and Zeus, perhaps not fully understanding what such a union would mean, gave his consent. The abduction happened on a day like any other. Persephone was reaching for a particularly beautiful narcissa, flower that had been placed there by Gaia herself as part of the plan, when the earth suddenly split open beneath her feet. From the chasm emerged Hades in his chariot of black horses, and before she could cry out, before she could run, she was swept down into the darkness, away from the light and warmth she had always known. The sound of the earth closing behind them echoed across the meadow, but there was no one to hear it except the flowers, who bowed their heads as if in mourning. Above, the sun continued to shine, the birds continued to sing, that something fundamental had changed in the world. Innocence had been lost, and with it, the eternal spring that had blessed the earth. When Demeter discovered her daughter's disappearance, her grief was beyond anything mortals or gods had ever witnessed. She was not just a mother mourning a lost child, but the very principle of fertility and growth, crying out against the violation of the natural order. Her anguish manifested in the world itself. Crops withered, trees dropped their leaves, and the earth began its first winter. For 9 days and nights, Demeter wandered the world, searching for any trace of her daughter. She carried torches lit from the fires of Mount Etna, and their light revealed a world growing barren under the weight of her sorrow. She questioned every god, every nymph, every creature she encountered, but none would tell her the truth about what had happened. Finally, it was Helios, the sun god who sees all things, who revealed the truth. He told her of Zeus's consent, of Hades' desire, of the abduction that had been sanctioned by the king of the gods himself. The knowledge that her own brother had conspired in her daughter's disappearance only deepened Demeter's grief and rage. In her fury, Demeter withdrew her blessing from the earth entirely. Nothing would grow, nothing would bear fruit, and mortals began to starve. The gods, who depended on human offerings for their honor, grew concerned as temples emptied and sacrifices ceased. Even Zeus began to understand that the cosmic order itself was threatened by the depth of a mother's grief. It was then that Hermes was sent to the underworld to negotiate Persephone's return. But Hades, who had genuinely come to love his reluctant bride, was clever in his response. He agreed to let her go, but first offered her a pomegranate, the fruit of the dead, sweet and red as heart's blood. Persephone, either from hunger or from a deeper wisdom about her own transformation, ate several of the seeds. This act bound her to the underworld by the most ancient laws. She could return to her mother and the world above. But for each seed she had eaten, she would have to spend 1 month of each year below with Hades. And so the pattern was established. Persephone would spend 8 months with her mother, bringing spring and summer to the world, and 4 months with her husband, during which Demeter's grief would bring autumn and winter. This myth of loss and return, of death and rebirth, became the foundation of the most profound religious experience the ancient world offered. At Eleusis, a small town about 14 miles northwest of Athens, a temple complex grew up around the worship of Demeter and Persephone, and there, for nearly 2,000 years, the mysteries were celebrated. The mysteries were not simply a retelling of the myth. but something far more transformative. A ritual experience that promised initiates a blessed afterlife and a different understanding of death itself. The secrets were so closely guarded that even today, despite extensive archaeological excavation and scholarly research, we can only guess at what actually took place in the inner sanctum of the temple. What we do know is that the mysteries attracted people from across the Mediterranean world. Emperors and slaves, philosophers and farmers, all came to Eleusis seeking initiation. The only requirements were that candidates speak Greek and have clean hands, meaning they had not committed murder. Social status, wealth, and political power meant nothing in the face of these ancient rites. The mysteries took place twice each year. The lesser mysteries were held in early spring, probably as a form of preliminary initiation. But it was the greater mysteries, celebrated in September and October, that offered the full transformative experience. The timing was significant. These rites took place during the season when Persephone was preparing to return to the underworld, when the natural world was demonstrating its own cycle of death and renewal. The celebration began in Athens at the Eleusinion, a sanctuary at the foot of the Acropolis. There, the sacred objects to Hera were displayed. We don't know what these objects were, but they were ancient beyond memory, passed down from initiate to initiate, and their very presence was said to carry divine power. From Athens, a great procession made its way along the sacred way to Eleusis. This was no solemn march, but a joyful celebration filled with singing, dancing, and ritual joking. The initiates carried branches of myrtle and wore crowns of flowers, and the whole procession had the air of a festival rather than a funeral. Along the way, they stopped at various shrines and performed rituals whose meaning has been lost to time. At the bridge over the river Cephisus, masked figures appeared to make jokes at the initiate's expense, a ritual humiliation that was said to echo Iambe's jests, which had made the grieving Demeter smile for the first time after losing her daughter. As evening approached and the procession reached Eleusis, the mood began to change. The laughter and singing gradually gave way to a more solemn atmosphere as the initiates prepared for what would happen in the darkness of the night to come. They fasted, purified themselves with sacred water, and made offerings at the various altars surrounding the main temple. Then, as night fell completely, the initiates were led into the Telesterion, the great hall of initiation. This was a unique building in the ancient world, not a temple in the traditional sense, but a vast covered space capable of holding thousands of people. The roof was supported by rows of columns, and around the walls ran tiers of seats carved from the living rock. In the center of the hall was the Anaktoron, a small stone building that housed the most sacred objects of the mysteries. Only the Hierophant, the chief priest who revealed the sacred things, was allowed to enter this inner sanctum. What he did there, what he saw, what he revealed to the assembled initiates, was the heart of the mystery, and it was never written down, never spoken of outside the sacred context. We know that at some point in the ceremony, the initiates drank the kykeon, a sacred beverage whose exact composition remains unknown. Some scholars believe it contained erbet, a fungus that grows on barley and has psychoactive properties. Others suggest it was simply a mixture of barley water, mint, and honey. But whatever its ingredients, the kykeon was clearly central to the transformative experience of the mysteries. In the darkness of the Telesterion, with thousands of initiates sitting in silent expectation, something happened that changed people's understanding of death forever. There were visions, revelations, moments of profound understanding that could not be captured in words. The Hierophant spoke certain sacred formulas, showed certain sacred objects, and somehow, in that moment, the initiates experienced what Cicero called the reason not only for living happily, but also for dying with better hope. Some accounts suggest that the climax of the mysteries involved a dramatic reenactment of Persephone's abduction and return. But this seems too simple, too literal for the profound transformation that initiates described. More likely, the experience involved some combination of ritual drama, psychoactive substances, sensory deprivation, and group psychology that produced genuine mystical experiences. What we can say with certainty is that the mysteries offered something that conventional Greek religion did not: a promise of a blessed afterlife. While most Greeks expected to spend eternity in the gray twilight of the asphodel meadows, initiates of the Eleusinian mysteries were promised a place in the Elysian fields, or perhaps something even better, a complete transformation of their understanding of death itself. The poet Pindar wrote of the initiates, "Happy is he who, having seen these rites, goes below the whole earth, for he knows the end of life, and he knows its God-sent beginning." This was not simply a promise of reward after death, but a fundamental shift in perspective, the understanding that death was not an ending, but a transformation, not a loss, but a return to a deeper truth. The mysteries also offered something else that was rare in the ancient world, a religious experience that was fundamentally democratic. Rich and poor, slave and free, men and women, all could be initiated. All could receive the same revelation. All could hope for the same blessed afterlife. In a world sharply divided by social status, the mysteries offered a vision of cosmic equality that was truly radical. The influence of the Eleusinian mysteries on Greek culture was profound and lasting. Many of the greatest figures of antiquity were initiates. Plato and Aristotle, Cicero and Marcus Aurelius, Sophocles and Euripides. They carried the influence of their initiation into their philosophical and literary works, though always in coded language that would not violate their oath of secrecy. The mysteries survived the rise of Christianity for several centuries, protected by their antiquity and the reverence in which they were held. Even some early Christian writers spoke of them with respect, seeing in them a preparation for the greater mysteries of their own faith. But in 392 CE, the Emperor Theodosius the first ordered the closure of all pagan temples, and the Eleusinian mysteries came to an end after nearly 2 millennia. The sacred fires were extinguished, the temples were abandoned, and the secrets that had been passed from Hierophant to Hierophant for 2,000 years died with the last initiates. The knowledge of what actually happened in the Telesterion, what visions were granted, what transformations occurred, was lost forever. Yet something of the spirit of the mysteries lives on in the very human longing for transcendence, for meaning beyond the material world, for the promise that death is not the final word. The mysteries spoke to something deep in the human psyche, the need to believe that consciousness survives bodily death, that love transcends separation, that the cycles of loss and return that we see in nature apply to human existence as well. In the gentle darkness of this night, as we contemplate these ancient secrets, we can perhaps understand something of what drew people to Eleusis. Not the specific beliefs or practices, which are lost to us, but the deeper human needs they addressed. The desire to face mortality with courage, to find meaning in suffering, to believe that love is stronger than death. The story of Demeter and Persephone, of loss and return, of grief transformed into wisdom, speaks to experiences that are as relevant today as they were 3,000 years ago. Every parent who has watched a child grow up can move away. Every person who has faced the death of someone they love, every soul who has wondered what lies beyond the thresholds of mortality, all can find something of themselves in this ancient tale. And perhaps that is the true mystery of Eleusis, not what was revealed in those nighttime ceremonies, but the recognition that the deepest truths about human existence cannot be captured in words or formulas, but must be experienced directly, felt in the heart, integrated into the very fabric of one's being. The mystery remains mysterious not because it was hidden, but because it was, and is ultimately beyond the power of language to contain. Verse 4. The gentle gods, the overlooked deities of daily life. As our journey through the strange and beautiful world of Greek mythology draws toward its close, we turn away from the grand dramas of the Olympians, away from the thunder of Zeus and the rage of Ares, to discover the quieter gods who presided over the gentler aspects of human existence. These are the deities who rarely appear in the great epic poems, who seldom demanded spectacular temples or costly sacrifices, but who were perhaps more intimately connected to the daily lives of ordinary people than any of their more famous relatives. In the soft hours between waking and sleeping, in the quiet moments of domestic peace, in the gentle transitions that mark the rhythm of human life, these overlooked gods maintained their patient vigil. They were the divine embodiment of life's quieter blessings, the comfort of home, the peace of sleep, the gentle embrace of dreams. First among these gentle presences was Hestia, goddess of the hearth and home. In a pantheon dominated by gods of war and passion, storm and sea, Hestia represented something profoundly different, the sacred nature of domestic tranquility. She was the oldest of the Olympians, firstborn of Kronos and Rhea, yet she chose to remain in the background, tending to the essential but unglamorous work of maintaining the cosmic order. Hestia's domain was the hearth fire that burned at the center of every home, the flame that provided warmth, light, and the means to prepare food. But her influence extended far beyond the practical. She was the divine principle that transformed a mere dwelling into a home, that made a collection of individuals into a family. Her presence was what made hospitality sacred, what turned the simple act of sharing a meal into a religious ceremony. In the great hall of Olympus, Hestia tended the sacred flame that never went out, the fire from which all other fires were lit. She was the still center around which the drama of divine politics revolved, the constant presence that provided stability while her brothers and sisters engaged in their passionate conflicts and elaborate schemes. When offered a throne among the 12 great Olympians, she graciously declined, preferring to remain by the hearth, ensuring that the home of the gods remained a place of peace and order. This choice reflected something profound about Hestia's nature. She was not interested in power or glory, in conquest or adventure. Her satisfaction came from the quiet work of maintenance, from the satisfaction of keeping the home fires burning, from the knowledge that her care provided the foundation that made all other activities possible. She understood that civilization itself depended on the simple miracle of the hearth, the place where raw became cooked, where strangers became guests, where the harsh world outside was transformed into the gentle world within. In mortal homes, Hestia's presence was felt every time a family gathered around the fire, every time bread was baked or wine was warmed, every time the day's work was set aside for the evening's rest. She was the goddess of the threshold, the boundary between public and private, between the dangerous world outside and the safe world within. To honor her was to honor the fundamental human need for shelter, for belonging, for the peace that comes from knowing you have a place in the world. Her worship required no elaborate rituals, no costly offerings. A simple portion of food cast into the fire, a moment of gratitude for the day's safety, a recognition that the hearth was a sacred space. These were enough to honor the goddess, who asked for nothing but gave everything necessary for civilized life. From the goddess of the hearth, we turn to her natural companion, Hypnos, the god of sleep. If Hestia presided over the peace of the waking home, Hypnos governed the deeper peace that comes when consciousness finally releases its grip on the day's concerns and allows the soul to drift into the restorative darkness of sleep. Hypnos was one of the sons of Nyx, the primordial goddess of night, born from the same cosmic darkness that gave birth to dreams, death, and all the mysteries that unfold when the sun goes down. But unlike his brother Thanatos, who governed the permanent sleep of death, Hypnos was the gentle god of temporary rest, the daily gift of renewal that allowed mortals to face each new day refreshed and restored. His dwelling was said to be a vast cave at the edge of the world, where the river Lethe flowed with its waters of forgetfulness. The cave was carpeted with poppies and other sleep-inducing herbs, and the air was thick with the drowsy hum of insects and the soft murmur of running water. No light penetrated this sacred space. No sound disturbed its perfect quiet. and no anxiety could survive in its embrace. Hypnos himself was depicted as a gentle young man with soft wings, carrying either a horn filled with sleep-inducing liquid or a collection of poppies. His touch was light, his presence peaceful, and his gift was the temporary death that allowed life to continue. He played no favorites king and beggar, hero and coward. All received his blessing equally when the time came for rest. But Hypnos was more than just the bringer of unconsciousness. He was the god who understood that sleep was not simply the absence of waking, but a different kind of presence altogether. In sleep, the boundaries between self and world became permeable. The rigid structures of waking consciousness dissolved, allowing for new kinds of understanding, new forms of wisdom that could only come in dreams. The Greeks understood that sleep was not merely a biological necessity, but a sacred activity, a time when the soul could travel to realms normally inaccessible to the conscious mind. In the embrace of Hypnos, mortals could receive visions of the future, communicate with the dead, or simply experience the profound rest that comes from temporarily setting aside the burden of being awake in a difficult world. Working closely with Hypnos was his son Morpheus, the god of dreams. While his father governed the state of sleep itself, Morpheus was responsible for the content of dreams, the strange and wonderful experiences that unfold in the theater of the sleeping mind. His name, which means shaper of forms, reflected his ability to create the vivid, often bizarre scenarios that populate our dreams. Morpheus was said to be the most skilled of all the dream gods at taking human form. He could appear in dreams as anyone, a loved one, a stranger, a figure from the past or future, and his impersonations were so perfect that dreamers never questioned their reality. Through these disguises, he could deliver messages from the gods, warnings of future events, or simply provide the emotional experiences that the dreaming soul required. But Morpheus was not simply a divine actor playing roles for sleeping mortals. He was the god who understood that dreams serve essential psychological and spiritual functions. In dreams, suppressed desires could be safely explored, unresolved conflicts could be worked through, and the deep wisdom of the unconscious mind could express itself in symbolic form. The realm of Morpheus was a place where the normal rules of reality did not apply. Time moved differently, space was fluid, and the impossible became commonplace. In this realm, the dead could speak with the living, the past could be changed, and the future could be glimpsed. It was a place of infinite possibility, where the dreaming mind could explore scenarios that waking life would never allow. The Greeks recognized that dreams were not random neural firing, but meaningful communications from the divine realm. They built temples where people could come to receive healing dreams, and they developed elaborate systems for interpreting the symbolic language of sleep. They understood that Morpheus was not simply entertaining sleeping minds, but providing them with essential information about their lives, their relationships, and their destinies. Among the other gentle gods, who rarely received their due recognition, was Iris, the goddess of the rainbow. While her more famous relative, Hermes, served as messenger between the gods and mortals, Iris was the messenger between the gods themselves, the divine herald who carried communications across the heavens with the speed of light itself. Iris was said to travel on the rainbow bridge that connected earth to heaven, her multicolored wings allowing her to move between the realms with grace and beauty. Unlike the often mischievous Hermes, Iris was utterly reliable, completely trustworthy, the divine embodiment of faithful communication. When the gods needed to send important messages to each other, they called upon Iris, knowing that their words would be delivered exactly as spoken, without embellishment or interpretation. But Iris represented more than just divine postal service. She was the goddess of the moment, when earth and heaven meet, when the ordinary world is touched by beauty so profound that it takes the breath away. The rainbow was her signature, the sign that she had passed through the sky, carrying messages of hope and renewal in the wake of storms. To see a rainbow was to witness Iris at work, to glimpse the bridge between the mortal and divine realms. It was a reminder that even after the darkest storms, beauty would return, that communication between earth and heaven was always possible, that the gods had not forgotten the world below. Another overlooked deity was Hebe, the goddess of youth and cupbearer to the gods. She was responsible for maintaining the eternal youth of the Olympians, serving them the nectar and ambrosia that kept them forever young and beautiful. But her influence extended beyond the divine realm to touch the lives of mortals as well. Hebe represented the precious gift of youth, not just physical youth, but the spiritual qualities that make youth so treasured: hope, energy, the capacity for joy, the ability to see each day as full of new possibilities. She was the goddess who reminded both gods and mortals that age was not just about the passage of time, but about the preservation of wonder, enthusiasm, and the capacity for growth. In her role as cupbearer, Hebe embodied the spirit of service and hospitality. She performed her duties with grace and cheerfulness, understanding that even the most humble service could be a form of worship, a way of contributing to the harmony of the cosmic order. Her presence at the divine feasts ensured that the gods remained connected to the joy and vitality that made existence worthwhile. Then there was Nemesis, the goddess of divine retribution, who ensured that the cosmic balance was maintained. Unlike the more dramatic and violent forms of divine justice associated with gods like Zeus or Apollo, Nemesis represented a quieter, more subtle form of justice, the principle that ensured that no one escaped the consequences of their actions. That hubris was always eventually humbled, that the scales of justice always found their balance. Nemesis was not cruel or vengeful, but rather implacably fair. She was the divine force that ensured that excessive good fortune did not lead to arrogance, that those who forgot their place in the cosmic order would be reminded of it, that justice would eventually prevail, even when it seemed that wrongdoing had triumphed. Her worship was particularly popular among those who had been wronged, but had no other recourse for justice. She was the goddess of last resort, the divine advocate for those who had been forgotten or ignored by more powerful forces. To invoke Nemesis was to trust that the universe itself was fundamentally just, that wrongs would be righted even if it took time for the balance to be restored. Among the most beloved of the minor deities were the Carides, or Graces Aglaea, Euphrosyne, and Thalia. These three sisters were the goddesses of beauty, joy, and all the gentle pleasures that make life worth living. They were the divine embodiment of everything that was lovely and gracious in human existence. The Carides were often depicted dancing together in a circle, their movements perfectly synchronized, their faces radiant with joy. They represented the principle that beauty was not just visual, but encompassed all the qualities that brought pleasure and harmony to life: kindness, generosity, wit, grace, and the ability to find joy in simple things. Unlike the passionate, often destructive beauty associated with Aphrodite, the beauty of the Carides was gentle and nurturing. They were the goddesses of the beauty found in friendship, in acts of kindness, in the pleasure of good conversation, in the satisfaction of work well done. They reminded mortals that the highest forms of beauty were not always the most dramatic, but often the most subtle and sustainable. These gentle gods, taken together, represented a different vision of the divine than what we usually associate with Greek mythology. They were not the gods of epic adventure or cosmic conflict, but the gods of daily life, of the small but essential experiences that actually make up most of human existence. They understood that life was not primarily about grand gestures and heroic deeds, but about the accumulation of small moments of peace, beauty, rest, and connection. In honoring these overlooked deities, the Greeks showed a profound understanding of what actually mattered in human life. They recognized that the drama of the great gods was exciting to contemplate, but that the real substance of existence was found in the quiet moments, the peace of the hearth, the rest of sleep, the wonder of dreams, the beauty of a rainbow after rain. the joy of simple pleasures shared with others. These gods asked for little a moment of gratitude, a recognition of their gifts, an acknowledgement that the ordinary world was also sacred. They offered in return the foundation that made everything else possible. The peace that allowed for growth, the rest that allowed for activity, the beauty that made existence worthwhile, the justice that made community possible. As we near the end of our journey through the bizarre and beautiful world of Greek mythology, these gentle gods remind us that the most profound truths are often the quietest ones. In a world that often seems dominated by conflict and drama, they offer a different path, the way of the hearth, the dream, the gentle grace that transforms ordinary moments into something sacred. Conclusion. And so, our journey through the strange and beautiful world of Greek mythology comes to its gentle close. We have descended into the depths of Hades, walked with Oedipus through the tragic complexities of fate and knowledge, stood in the sacred darkness of Eleusis, where ancient mysteries promised transformation, and finally discovered the quiet gods who watched over the gentler aspects of human existence. What emerges from these ancient stories is not just entertainment or historical curiosity, but a profound understanding of what it means to be human in a universe that is larger and more mysterious than we can fully comprehend. The Greeks created these myths not to escape from reality, but to better understand it, to find meaning in suffering, purpose in uncertainty, and beauty in the midst of chaos. 3,000 years later, we find ourselves still grappling with the same fundamental questions that haunted the ancient world. We still wonder about the nature of fate and free will, still struggle to find meaning in loss, still seek transformation in the face of mortality. The gods may have different names now, the temples may have crumbled, but the human heart remains remarkably unchanged. Perhaps that is the true gift of these ancient stories, not their answers, which were always provisional and culturally specific, but their recognition that the questions themselves are eternal. In creating gods who embodied both human virtues and human flaws, the Greeks acknowledged that divinity and humanity are not separate realms, but part of a single, complex tapestry of existence. The bizarre world of Greek mythology, with all its strange transformations and impossible events, its cruel fates and unexpected mercies, its grand passions and quiet graces, offers us a mirror in which we can see our own lives reflected. In the story of Persephone's return, we find hope for renewal after loss. In the tragedy of Oedipus, we discover dignity in the face of terrible knowledge. In the mysteries of Eleusis, we glimpse the possibility of transformation. In the gentle gods of hearth and sleep, we find permission to value the quiet moments that actually constitute most of our lives. As you drift towards sleep tonight, perhaps you can carry with you something of the wisdom of these ancient stories. The understanding that suffering, while painful, is not meaningless. The recognition that knowledge, even when it hurts, is preferable to ignorance. The faith that transformation is always possible, even in the darkest moments. And the simple revolutionary idea that the ordinary world, your world, with its daily routines and quiet pleasures, is also sacred, also worthy of reverence, also touched by the divine. The Greeks gave us gods who are neither perfect nor omnipotent, but fully engaged with the complexities of existence. They offered us stories that acknowledge both the beauty and the terror of being alive, conscious and mortal in an uncertain universe. And they left us with the profound comfort of knowing that others before us have faced the same mysteries, asked the same questions, and found ways to live with grace and dignity in the face of the unknown. Rest well, knowing that you are part of this ancient conversation, this eternal questioning, this ongoing attempt to understand what it means to be human. The gods may be silent now, but the stories they inspired continue to speak, offering companionship in the darkness, wisdom in uncertainty, and the gentle promise that even in our most difficult moments, we are not alone. Sweet dreams, fellow travelers. May your sleep be peaceful, your dreams be kind, and your rest be deep. The ancient world has shared its secrets with you tonight, and now it's time to let those secrets work their gentle magic in the quiet theater of your sleeping mind.